October 1942. Over the war-torn skies of Europe, death came not from what could be seen, but from what couldn't. Invisible fragments of steel, shards from exploding flak shells, tore through the thin aluminum skins of American bombers, ripping into the men inside. For the crews of the U.S. 8th Air Force, each mission over Nazi Germany was a test of endurance and chance. Thousands of feet above the ground, the air was cold, the noise deafening, and survival, a lottery. They called it the aluminum coffin. By late 1942, bomber losses were staggering. Entire formations disappeared into smoke and fire. And when the survivors returned, surgeons faced a grim pattern, a pattern that one man would not ignore. That man was Colonel Malcolm Cummings Grow, Chief Surgeon of the U.S. Army Air Forces in Europe. Grow was not a combat pilot. He was a doctor, a man of science, but one who understood that numbers, when lives are at stake, can speak louder than orders. After every mission, Grow examined the wounded. He collected data, methodically, obsessively, counting the entry points of shrapnel, measuring wounds, studying the fragments that had been pulled from flesh and bone. And then, he noticed something extraordinary. Over 70% of all bomber casualties came from low-velocity fragments, tiny pieces of flak traveling slower than bullets. Fragments that, theoretically, could be stopped by something far lighter than steel. At the time, the idea of body armor for airmen was considered unnecessary, even absurd. Military command believed that extra weight would only hinder movement, reduce efficiency, and exhaust the crew. But Grow saw it differently. He believed that the human body deserved the same level of protection as the aircraft that carried it. His first step was simple and unauthorized. Without waiting for official approval, he began designing a prototype. Working quietly from his medical headquarters in England, Grow contacted two unlikely allies. The British Wilkinson Sword Company, legendary makers of ceremonial blades, and the armor specialists at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, experts in medieval steel protection. Together, they began to translate the language of the 15th century into the survival science of the 20th. They studied how weight was distributed in ancient armor, how flexible joints protected without restricting motion. From that research came a radical concept, a flak vest made not of heavy steel plates, but of overlapping manganese steel discs, light enough to wear for hours, yet strong enough to deflect shrapnel. In a time when even minor deviations from command could end a career, Grow pressed on. He ordered experimental vests to be produced, quietly, unofficially, and distributed them to select bomber crews for testing. The results were immediate and astonishing. After the first missions with Grow's vests, medical officers reported a dramatic reduction in fatal torso wounds. Crews who would have died from flak injuries returned alive, often with nothing more than bruises. It wasn't a miracle. It was math. Grow had identified the problem, analyzed the threat, and engineered a practical solution, all without waiting for permission. In a war where millions of lives hung on efficiency, this small act of defiance would save thousands. But at the time, few in command understood the scale of what he had achieved. The U.S. Army Air Force bureaucracy was slow, cautious, and deeply skeptical of new equipment. Many senior officers dismissed the vest as unnecessary, even dangerous, extra weight that might doom a plane under heavy fire. Yet in base hospitals across England, the evidence was undeniable. The wounded who wore gross experimental vests were surviving wounds that had once been fatal. What began as an unauthorized project soon became an urgent mission. By early 1943, the M1 flak vest was officially approved for production. A lightweight, flexible vest that reduced bomber fatalities by an estimated 77%. It was one of the greatest life-saving innovations of the war. And it came not from generals or engineers, but from a surgeon who simply refused to accept that death was inevitable. 8 minutes. That was the average life expectancy of a bomber crew once they entered enemy airspace. But thanks to gross determination, those 8 minutes became a little longer. And for thousands of men, long enough to make it home. By March 1943, the very first prototypes of the M1 flak vest had reached the hands of American bomber crews. The planes they flew were still fragile, still exposed to enemy fire and exploding flak. But for the first time, the men inside had a chance, a real chance, to survive wounds that had once been almost certain death. Surgeons stationed at air bases began to notice the difference immediately. Shrapnel that had previously pierced flesh now struck the steel plates and came to a stop. Men who should have died were returning with nothing more than bruises and scrapes. Morale, fragile and battered by endless missions, began to lift. Meanwhile, Colonel Malcolm Grow continued to refine his invention. He consulted metallurgists at Wilkinson Sword, examining the properties of manganese steel. He worked closely with armor experts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, studying centuries-old brigandines and armor designs to ensure flexibility and coverage without adding unnecessary weight. The vest was ingeniously simple. It consisted of overlapping steel plates, each small and precise, sewn into a canvas shell. The overlapping design meant that critical areas were protected completely, while allowing the wearer to move and operate inside a cramped bomber cabin. The modular system allowed specific adjustments for each crew position. Ball turret gunners, trapped in their vulnerable spheres, received extra panels to cover exposed angles. Pilots and co-pilots were issued lighter vests, designed to protect the torso without restricting movement. Bombardiers, navigators, and radio operators received vests tailored to their seating positions. At first, many commanders were skeptical. Some believed the extra weight would slow the men, hinder operations, or even create new dangers. But the evidence from the field was undeniable. Chest and abdominal wounds among crews wearing the M1 vest dropped dramatically. Statistical reports confirmed what Grow had seen. 77% fewer fatal torso injuries and a 60% overall reduction in casualties. Word of the vest spread quickly through air bases in England. Demand far exceeded supply, and production contracts were issued to factories across the United States. American industry, already focused on planes and engines, now mobilized to produce flak vests at scale. Grow did not stop there. He introduced improved helmets designed to stop shrapnel, electrically heated clothing to protect against frostbite at high altitudes, and refined oxygen systems to prevent hypoxia. He even established rest facilities and psychiatric support programs, addressing both the physical and mental toll of combat on airmen. By the summer of 1943, the M1 vest had become standard issue. Bombers flying dangerous daylight missions over Germany were still under threat. But for the first time, the men inside were equipped with protection that made a real difference. The collaboration behind the vest was unprecedented. A surgeon, a sword manufacturer, and museum armor experts combined centuries of knowledge into a practical, life-saving solution. Each contributed expertise from very different worlds, yet together they changed the course of survival in the air war. When the raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg occurred, the true value of the vests became clear. Pilots and gunners who would have perished in earlier missions survived. Flak fragments embedded in steel plates provided tangible proof: the vests worked. They did not make the skies safe, but they shifted the balance in favor of life. Gross' unauthorized project had quietly become one of the most important innovations of the war. It was not a story of glory or heroics. It was the steady saving of lives, one mission at a time. As men returned home who might otherwise have been counted among the dead. By early 1944, production had scaled even further. American factories, aided by British expertise and historical research, delivered thousands of vests. The 8th Air Force crews were better protected than ever before. And the innovations introduced by Grow would influence military body armor for generations to come. In those skies over Germany, with bombs falling and flak bursting around them, one man's determination, ingenuity, and refusal to accept inevitability saved countless lives. By the spring of 1944, the full impact of Colonel Gross' innovation had begun to be felt across the bomber fleet. Every mission flown by the 8th Air Force carried the invisible shield of his flak vests. Crews who had once flown with fear now carried a measure of confidence. Knowing that their torsos, the most vulnerable part of their bodies, were protected from the deadly fragments that rained down from anti-aircraft fire. The raids themselves had grown more daring. Deep into the heart of Germany, B-17s and B-24s struck ball-bearing factories, oil refineries, and rail yards. Enemy flak batteries were concentrated, precise, and merciless. Before the vests, casualty lists returned from these missions were devastating. Afterward, though the danger remained real, the numbers told a different story. Pilots survived hits that would have been fatal only months before. Gunners returned with only minor injuries from fragments that had struck their vests. Medical officers meticulously collected the data. Among crews wearing the M1 and its variants, chest and abdominal fatalities dropped from 36 and 39% respectively, to just 8 and 7%. Overall wounds decreased by 60%. In a single calculation, Colonel Grow had changed the odds of survival for thousands of airmen. Production of the flak vests had become a vast operation. American factories worked around the clock, producing thousands of units each month. British metallurgists provided guidance on steel alloys, while museum experts refined the design. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, whose armorers had studied medieval brigandines and scale armor, continued to provide crucial insight into the placement and overlap of plates, ensuring maximum protection with minimal weight. The vests themselves evolved. Early canvas shells were replaced with durable nylon fabric, improving water resistance and durability for European weather. Quick-release mechanisms allowed crews to jettison armor in emergencies, preventing the vest from becoming a hazard during bailing out or parachute deployment. Specialized variations protected ball turret gunners, waist gunners, and pilots, each tailored to the unique demands of their stations. Colonel Grow did not stop at armor alone. He developed electrically heated clothing to combat frostbite at high altitude, improved oxygen systems to prevent hypoxia, and windblast shields to protect gunners from severe air pressure. He also instituted rest homes and psychiatric support programs for crews who had endured months of constant stress. His approach was holistic, protecting the body and mind, ensuring that survival was not just a matter of armor, but of overall resilience. The results of these innovations were staggering. By mid-1944, bomber crews were surviving missions that would once have been considered almost suicidal. Even under intense flak and fighter opposition, the M1 vest allowed men to return to base alive. With steel plates holding shrapnel at bay, carrying only bruises as testimony to the near misses they endured. The success of the program was quietly celebrated. Official memos recorded reductions in casualties and improvements in morale. But the true impact was personal. Thousands of airmen returned home to families. Lives that might have been lost without the vision and determination of one surgeon. Colonel Grow's legacy extended far beyond World War II. The principles he pioneered, modular armor, evidence-based design, careful observation of wounds, influenced the body armor used in Korea, Vietnam, and modern conflicts. Today, Kevlar vests, ceramic plates, and flexible protective gear trace their conceptual roots back to those small, overlapping manganese steel plates. In the skies over Germany, amid the roar of engines and the whistle of falling shells, the story of the flak vest was one of quiet heroism. No medals were given for a perfect calculation or a design adjustment. Yet each life saved was a testament to the power of science, observation, and perseverance. The bomber crews of 1944 would never know the full story. They would only know that they survived. And that somewhere, a surgeon had refused to accept death as inevitable, choosing instead to act, to invent, and to save. By the end of the war, more than 338,000 M1 vests and tens of thousands of variants had been produced. Thousands of lives had been spared. And one man's vision had permanently changed the nature of aerial warfare, setting a standard for the protection of those who risked their lives above the clouds. By the summer of 1944, the skies over Europe had grown deadly. American bomber crews flew longer, more hazardous missions than ever before. B-17s and B-24s, their fuselages still vulnerable, carried men deep into the heart of Germany. Their targets ranged from ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt to fuel refineries in Leipzig, and aircraft production plants in Berlin, each guarded by dense, lethal flak batteries. It was in these missions that the M1 flak vest proved its value most dramatically. Airmen returned with vests riddled with embedded shrapnel, yet their torsos were intact. Pilots who would have fallen to low-velocity fragments walked away. Gunners, trapped in their exposed positions, survived bursts of flak that might have ended their lives without armor. Medical officers meticulously catalogued the data. Fatal chest injuries fell from 36% to just 8%. Abdominal and groin injuries fell similarly. Overall, casualties decreased by over 60%. These numbers, though stark, could not fully capture the human impact. Thousands of men returned home to families, to lives they might otherwise have lost. Production of the vests had reached full industrial scale. American factories, many repurposed from aircraft and engine production, ran day and night. British metallurgists advised on the optimal steel alloys. The Metropolitan Museum of Art continued to study medieval brigandines and scale armor, offering critical guidance on plate overlap, flexibility, and weight distribution. The vests themselves were constantly refined. Early canvas shells were replaced with water-resistant nylon. Quick-release mechanisms were improved to allow immediate ejection in emergencies. Specialized versions protected ball turret gunners, waist gunners, pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. Every position had armor tailored to its unique exposure. Gross innovations extended beyond armor. Electrically heated clothing kept crews warm at altitudes where frostbite had once been inevitable. Improved oxygen systems prevented hypoxia. Windblast shields protected gunners from sudden air pressure changes in high-speed dives. He even established rest facilities and psychiatric support programs for crews suffering from combat fatigue. By late 1944, entire squadrons were flying with gross armor. During raids on Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr Valley, the difference was clear. Planes returned with gunners alive, with fragments embedded in their vests. One navigator reported a shell fragment striking the steel plates directly, stopping just short of his chest. A ball turret gunner emerged with only bruises, while his turret was riddled with shrapnel. These were lives that might have been lost without the armor, proof of the program's success. Colonel Gross' collaboration was unprecedented. A surgeon, a sword manufacturer, and museum armor experts combined centuries of knowledge into practical, life-saving design. Each contribution was vital. The surgeon understood human anatomy and wound patterns. The manufacturer knew metallurgy and steel properties. And the museum experts applied centuries of armor craftsmanship to ensure flexibility and coverage. The legacy of the M1 vest extended far beyond World War II. In Korea and Vietnam, the principles of modular armor, evidence-based design, and battlefield observation influenced protective systems. Modern Kevlar and ceramic plates trace their conceptual roots to Gross' work in 1942 to 1944. Every bulletproof vest worn today owes a debt to his vision. Colonel Gross himself continued to innovate, even after the war. He became the first Surgeon General of the United States Air Force, pioneering programs that improved aviation medicine, mental health, and flight safety. He received the Legion of Merit and the Distinguished Service Medal. Yet his greatest achievement remained the lives saved by his flak vest program. The final months of the war saw bomber crews flying with unprecedented confidence. While the skies remained dangerous, the flak vest program had fundamentally altered the odds. It was a silent, quiet revolution in survival, where intellect, data, and collaboration achieved what sheer courage alone could not. By war's end, over 338,000 M1 vests and tens of thousands of variants had been produced. Thousands of airmen had survived because of one man's determination. The principles he introduced, protection against the most common threats, modular design, and careful observation, would influence military and police body armor for decades to come. In those dangerous skies, amidst roaring engines and the whistle of falling shells, The story of Colonel Gross' unauthorized steel vest is one of quiet heroism. No dramatic last stands, no cinematic victories, only the steady saving of lives, mission after mission. And the enduring lesson that innovation, perseverance, and careful science can protect humanity, even in the most lethal circumstances imaginable. The vests may have been steel and canvas, but the lives they saved were priceless. And the story of their creation stands as a testament to the extraordinary impact of one individual, whose insight and determination changed the course of aerial warfare forever.